Alrighty, I think that we are live. Sorry, I'm a bit late, my friends. I had to get a little bit of, it's not quite tea. It's a concoction of hot water and honey and lemon juice and cayenne pepper. Normally I put some ginger in there too, but, didn't want to get too fancy. All right. We see folks are trickling in. I see Johnny Villar is joining us again this evening. We're waiting on Salome. She is being fashionably late. She is still setting up. But in the meantime, how's everyone doing this evening? It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday evening. Lots going on in the news, as always, but this is a news-free zone. We're here to just talk about some art and some culture. And, excuse me, and kick back a little bit. All right. Polly, am I sick? I am not sick, but I simply enjoy a hot beverage, a little bit of cayenne pepper to get you opened up. Although my nose is running a little bit, but thank you for asking. I'm doing quite well. Got 160 joining us right now. Do me a huge favor. You can hit some thumbs up and share the link, all that stuff. I'm flying solo, and I'm a bit of a Luddite, or a boomer, as they say. Boomhauer. Not really Boomhauer, but you know what I'm saying. Let's see here. I'm going to make sure that YouTube is live. Going to make sure that Twitter is live. They want us to call it X, but I just can't let it die. It's got to be Twitter. I'm a dissident. Well, someone called me that, so that's what it has to be. Let's see here. Oh, it's happening. It's embarrassing. I can see myself. If you're looking really closely and you're kind of a pervert, you can see I have a little hole here in my shirt. It looks like a speck of dust. It's not. I hulked out of my shirt so much. I pierced it. The sharp diamond nipple cleaving right through like a hot knife through butter. There's nothing like an old T-shirt that you just love. I don't know. Maybe is it just fellas? Is that the only people that enjoy that? Just a nice old ratty T-shirt. You just love it. I mean, look at the armpit on it. I've hulked out on this thing. Done so many pull-ups. Just burst out of it. It's just the shirt is dying. It's dying as we speak, but I love it. And it's a good lesson to go to the gym, my friends, especially guys. You'll be surprised at how good you look in a nice form-fitting T-shirt. You should probably wear pants with that as well. So that's usually a good idea, is to wear pants alongside that. Some kind of lower garment. All righty. Paulie, yes, the drink does have a kick. A little bit of anti-inflammatory properties in there as well. All right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had issues. Still like.
All right.
Okay. All right. I have overcame. Okay. Yeah. That'll work. Do you hear?
We can hear you.
Okay.
We can also hear all of nature behind you. Life is unfolding.
I thought that might be a vibe. Not the plane. The plane right now is not a vibe, but the crickets are.
They are. They form a nice soundscape. How are you doing? How are you doing this evening, my friend? My lovely, vivacious friend.
Pretty good. I am very, very chill. I feel very good. I'm very excited to talk about this album. I've listened to it 3 times straight through in the last 24 hours, and that has been fun. Um, and otherwise, I feel very, I don't know, very. It's so good of an album. It has made me more peaceful. Like I very much contribute my good mood to the album.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned being feeling more peaceful, and yet so much of the subject matter of that album deals with such heavy strife and struggle. Yeah, it's really interesting. We'll probably give it a few more minutes, but like maybe 5 more minutes as people are still trickling in.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so Salome texted me this morning and was like, I can't, anything you text me now, I can't help but read it, and like it's an exaggeration of your Cuban accent, but oh my god, I got.
I'll become a mute. I will take a vow of silence. I'm fine with the sound of my own voice, but the fact that other people perceive me as having a distinct accent, I've never made peace with that because in my head, of course, I don't anything. So
No, well, here's the thing, because you don't really, but like most people, when you get really comfortable or really excited about something, you get this, some of the mannerisms kind of creep out, and you're like, yeah.
they're there. I know they're there. I know you're not wrong when you exaggerate my accent. I know you're not wrong. It's just like holding the mirror up, and I'm like, yeah, that's true. That is how I sound sometimes, isn't it?
No, well, it's okay. That's why we enjoy your company so much. Yeah, actually, I listened to the album on a walk this morning, and what's great is that it's so. I mean, it's like maybe 45 minutes long, so it's not a long album. It really
Yeah.
flows together, and it actually is really great listening. And people thought I was weird. My mouth was kind of just hanging open, slack, as as I was letting all the sounds pour over me. But it really is one of those things where it's nice to sit down and just listen to it in a sitting and have it wash over you. It's one of those things that's so cohesive and so coherent as a body of work that it's extraordinary. But we'll get into all of that.
Yeah, it really is like one long song. It very much is one of those albums that just mastered the art of the album being this entire experience that you go through from the first song to the end, where you can play the full album and it really keeps you in this world, in this particular mood, even though the songs are very different in content and like um in their kind of mood themselves, but they're all still linked in different ways enough to make everything flow together seamlessly, to make it feel like it's all one song almost. And I always love when a musician can do that because you just like to be kept in like that. It makes the whole thing feel like an experience, and that's one of the things that I think makes this album particularly special and unique. It's not just like, oh, they kept playing instruments from the end of track 1 to the start of track 2. Like, it's not that. Like, that is fun, but what Marvin Gaye does is to put you into this world. The whole album for me very much feels like almost a trip. Like it really has this kind of like journey that you go through with him, through all these different like ups and downs. And I just find it like it's just such a great thing to experience, and for an album to be able to do that, that is very much something. I don't know. I don't know how many people just like listen to full albums anymore. I was very excited to do this talk with you because it gave me an excuse to listen to a full album, which I don't do very often. And it's so odd to think that because that used to be the norm about how music was experienced. If it wasn't at a concert, I mean, even in a concert, they play like usually the album. And now we listen to like singles all shuffled, and like we make our own playlists, which of course has its benefits for sure. But it's really nice when you can spend that extra time. And I think in an era when we are so getting used to short form things. Like everything is short, like the music on TikTok and Instagram. It's like we're talking about 60-second clips of a sound. And so people are being much more accustomed to listening to short things, and having that be enough for them to form a reaction and a relationship to it. And I don't think that's good. I actually think that while that's fun and that has its merits, good art that like is really gonna move you, it needs to take some time, because it has to take you away from where you normally are and take you to somewhere new. And that takes a little time. And we don't often give things that time anymore. We want to go like from the one song, okay, take me through it, one song, okay, moving on, I want something new, I want something different. And an album is very much like an album like this very much does the opposite.
Well, I think it's really interesting because we're already off to the races, so we will start at the very beginning. So the album was released back in 1971, and there was a wonderful interview that Marvin gave, not Marvin Gaye, but Marvin gave, where he said that because he's this massive sex symbol, and he'd already seen massive success under the Motown label, but he said that he'd become known for singing these love songs, and he said, given all the things that were happening in the world at that time, he said, I felt I couldn't just sit here and sing love songs. And so he had a lot to say when he was making this album, and it bleeds through in every song. And it's a wonderful concept album where he takes on the form of, or he sort of embodies this jaded, disillusioned Vietnam War veteran returning to his home country. And he sees all of this strife and turmoil. He says, this ain't living. There's so much injustice going on. And he goes through this entire wave of experience throughout the album. It's reconnecting with old friends. It's trying to make sense of the world as it is. I get the sense, this is me adding some story on top of it, but I wonder how the war has changed him, and now he's back, and he's both more jaded, but in a way also way more loving. I think what is interesting about the work is that it treats the subject matter with compassion, and there's an openness and a sincerity that I think really sets Marvin apart from a lot of modern artists. When he sings about, save the babies, it can sound preachy, but because it's him, it's so full of genuine desire and passion. And there's an openness there and a vulnerability there that's laced throughout the album. And even on a song like Flying High, where he's talking about being high, it's treated with such a tenderness and an intimacy, even where it takes something that's very ugly, but also it makes it very beautiful in a way. So, as you were saying, as a whole experience, it really takes you through the gamut of emotions, and I think that's one of the reasons that it is a classic. When I had the scholar Victor Davis Hanson on the podcast, I asked him what constitutes a classic, and essentially he said that a classic is a work that attacks or examines some of the universal questions about our existence, but does so in a very novel and creative way. And that's why I think this work, what's going on, it is a work, it's a product of its time, but the way that it attacks these issues is so personal. I had a teacher who once said that the more personal something is, the more universal it becomes. And I think that this album is a prime example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to what you've said. So like the sincerity is something that jumped out to me as well. And I was thinking about that because it's like, gosh, what is it about this album that feels so unique? And I try hard to like really discern down my criticisms of it, because I don't like to just rely on the feelings. I think that that's not the only way. Like there is an objective way to understand your preferences in art and to describe whether art is good or not. And it's not just like, a lot of people like older art because it's just nostalgic in a way that they'd be more harsh if it came out in their lifetime. Like there's that like nostalgia bias. But the thing is, his this album is deep. It's not just that it's like, oh, it's going to dark places, like that it's discussing like police brutality and like the draft and all these different like kind of or just poverty, all these kind of elements that are dark. That's not just what makes it deep. It's just exactly what you described. Like there's such a range. And that's why I said at the start that like somehow this album that's actually really about terrible things, really about like the tragedies of life and society, I find peace in it because of the depth of experience and context he creates around these tragic ideas. Like he takes you through this experience, like in Save the Babies is like one of my favorite because I think it's so obvious how he goes. It like starts out where you're kind of like, oh, there's bad things in the world, like what's up with this? This is, we all kind of recognize this, and does anybody care? Does anybody care? And these are very natural questions that I feel like we're all inclined to ask when we look at the problems in the world. We look around and we're like, how is this okay? How do people not care about this? Don't people care? Why is this happening? But then you see him change and start to go to this other element, and the music changes along with it. Now it gets to this kind of like moody, darker, almost like a clashing, like an uncomfortable sound. And he starts to question, like, who is it to blame? Who is it to blame? And there's this very almost like nihilistic pit to the song at that point, where it's a natural inclination, right, of looking around, seeing tragedy, seeing injustice, being like, it feels like nobody cares because these things keep happening, and then looking for someone to blame and starting to get like distraught because you want some reason for why this is the way that it is. But then at the end, it comes back up. The song comes up in this melodic, beautiful, cathartic way. And the lyrics change to now say, like, save the babies. Wait, that's what it's for. That's why we care. That's why we try. That's why we love. Because that's actually what matters, is like making a better world for children, for our descendants in the future. And so he's like, it's like he finds meaning in this kind of like nihilistic confrontation with the ugliness of the world. And this album is so great because you say at the beginning how he didn't want to sing love songs anymore. And I think one of the central themes of this album is love. So I think it's so great that he retained that like organic essence that he has, like to love, and to talk about love, but he applied it somewhere different. And this is why I think political art done this way is so powerful, because it's not just about like, look at the problems, look, I'm aware of this, are you? It's not preachy, it's none of that. It's very much just like, I care and I want to solve these things through love. It's very true to him. And the love angle, it's like, that's exactly what you allow people to kind of like work through these dark things through. It's like, yeah, there is all this injustice, there is all these terrible things, but you can still love. And there's so many beautiful different parts of different songs where he kind of like invites you to love. There's a line on one of like the songs close to the end that's like straight up just like, let me invite you into a world of love or something like that. And I'm like, yes, like that's so good on so many levels.
Yeah, I definitely got
Making noise. Like, is this?
Oh yeah, we can hear you. We can hear.
Can you give me a minute? This is not acceptable. Give me a minute.
Yeah. No, I love what she said about love. I had the very same reaction to it. That throughout all of the strife and the struggle that goes on in the album, there is a huge sense of openness. And I'll repeat this when she comes back. But one thing I notice, and this, I've been thinking a lot lately about the how cultural shifts and societal shifts are reflected in popular music. And of course, I know not the first person to, far from the first person to tackle this issue. But one thing that stands out to me about a lot of music from the 1970s, particularly Black music, soul music, R&B, is that there is a very sincere sense of openness and togetherness. There's a huge yearning for peace and for love that that seems to me to be largely absent. There's a lot of, it's weird because Marvin was a huge sex symbol, remains a huge sex symbol. And yet I think what makes him even more powerful in that regard is the fact that he's a romantic figure. And that is what is throughout the entire album. It's just this sort of this sense of this romantic vision of what the world could be. It doesn't feel as corny or as treacly as John Lennon singing Imagine. But as an entire work, the way that it all comes together to espouse a strong vision of the world is fantastic. And as Salome was saying, was very cathartic. I was saying as you were putting that dog down, I hope it's okay. That
I'm okay. It's okay. Those dogs are so rude. I'm taking care of a friend's dogs, and they run this household. Not in my life, though.
Okay, you need to binge watch some Cesar Milan and get on it. You remember he's always trained. He's never training the dog. He's always training the owner.
Dude,
so
real though. Like he's right, because the behavior of dogs absolutely reflects the psychology of an owner. You better believe you will never catch me with a dog interrupting my live stream. I work and I put a roof over your house. I put a roof over your house. You better be silent, relaxed over there, not barking. What is this?
Wow, she is one tough lady. But I was saying that I had a very similar reaction to yours, which was that it's an album that's laced through with love. I said, he really puts forth this romantic vision of what life could be, what society could be. And again, by our standards today, I think, we think it's corny, we think it's sentimental. But what I was saying was that I think what distinguishes a lot of this music that I love, I think the 1970s for Black American music is probably my favorite era. And one of the reasons is that there's a huge yearning for peace and for love and for togetherness. It's a theme that runs throughout a lot of this. And even when it comes to issues such as drug addiction, you see the issue. I mean, now so much music is about how rich I got by selling drugs. But with this work, it's, I mean, maybe we'll spend some time to focus on Flying High, or a song like Flying High, because for me, we talk about this aspect of beauty, these aspects of beauty and awe and transcendence. And I mentioned last week this concept that I've come up with. I mean, I'm sure someone else has already mentioned it, but I call it compound affect, AFFECT, where something that is ugly is beautified. And as a result, both the ugliness of the experience and the beauty are both elevated, and the effect as a whole compounds on top of itself. And with Flying High, we have a situation where, and especially when you consider Marvin's personal demons and his struggle with drugs, there's such a very intimate, personal, almost tender quality about the song and the vulnerability which it espouses. And he's singing in a very tender part of his voice. It's very vulnerable and very raw in terms of it's so stupid-minded, but I can't help it. And when what's the line about the day will come and it's all right, my friend, but when the night comes, the pain comes again. And there is something about that song where it's like, oh, he's on drugs, he's tripping or whatever, and you reconsider that he's singing from the perspective of this disillusioned, probably traumatized soldier, and of course he's going to turn to drugs and depravity, trying to deal with his pain. But the way it's delivered is just so it's done with such care and such artistry that it makes the song that much more memorable and that much more moving. And it's followed right after that with an ode to God, which I don't think is which in terms of the whole construction of the album, I don't think it's an accident. It's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really interesting part of it too, because there very much is this like ode to God throughout it. And I think the thing is that I had the same thought, that I also really appreciated that, just like this album does, its era of music very much did believe in peace. It did believe in love. And this is, I think, one of the crucial problems in art now, is that it so often doesn't. The people that make art now so often don't really believe in peace and don't really believe in love. They want to give it conditionally to certain groups, or they want to flaunt how much they don't need to give it at all because I'm an independent bitch and I don't need the love, or they want to flaunt how they don't need it. They don't need it because they've got this other thing. They've got success. They've got this or whatever. And it's not that there's nothing, that those experiences, those mindsets can't be expressed through art. It's just that there has to be enough depth and self-awareness to allow for it to be um, more interesting. And I think that's why that song "Flying High" is able to discuss basically drug use in a way that's artful and interesting and doesn't feel like kind of crass or predictable. It's because he's self-aware. There's conflicting elements in this. It's like, this brings me this peace. And that's what's so great about the music, is that you feel it with him. That song is so just like airy and lilting, and it's got such an uplifting kind of like relaxing sound to it throughout, that it makes you want to fly high. Like, that's a very, I'm just like, this sounds great. But then he has throughout the song these like, help me. I need help. I need help. It comes throughout the song. It's like it literally, like, it makes me want to cry. That song moves me so much because it's so honest. It's so complex. It's got that turmoil within him of like, I want this peace, and it really feels so peaceful in the moment. And then I go through this cycle again. And that's what makes that such a unique commentary on something that's like very commonly discussed and very commonly part of art. I think it's just that vulnerability. It really is that. It's like, I'm going to show you not just the fun part of this. I'm going to show you the fucking sad part, the pathetic part, the part where I know that I'm doing the wrong thing and that I need help, but that I can't actually go out and get it because I'm just going to do it all over again. And that's so real. And yet it's got this beautiful melody to it the whole time. And that kind of depth, that sincerity, that vulnerability, that complexity, um, I think that's missing. I think that's very often missing from art, from music now. Not always, like, there's plenty of like less popular music, whatever, that you can find it in. But I think there is something unique about, like, we discussed this with Vertigo also. I keep coming to the same conclusion, that our culture is kind of just like, on the mainstream, a little too cynical and a little too guarded to be able to go to these places, because you make stuff like this, and I think the instinct in at least the loudest critics and the people that are driving the like institutions that can still make you or break you type of thing, if you're dependent, beholden to these kind of like recording companies and film companies and agents and all these things like that, that they might not want to touch it if it seems like one of the things that'll spark criticism, and it'll be controversial in a way that's like actually controversial, and not kind of like fake, like, oh look, like, I'm gay Satan or whatever type of thing that we see. It's like, oh, that's super, like, we'll go so controversial there. But like, if it actually talks about some real human shit that makes people look a little less like, of whatever the little box you want to paint, that's like, this is okay, they don't want to touch it. And I actually saw that there was like a study that came out recently that said, that confirmed what we all know, which is that people are more conformist today, believe it or not, despite the fact that there seems like we have more freedom to be 1,000 genders every different day, and to like make up definitions of words and just like live in our absolute own reality, and like, you better respect it. Despite that, people are more conformist today. They're more likely to not say what they actually think. They're more likely to just like kind of go along with the group, and care more about how they're perceived by others. And so it's funny because you think like the past, it's like, oh no, we're more progressive now, we're more radical, we're more advanced, we're more ahead in some way, just by way of being in the future. But there's something very often that I find that is not in the mainstream art scene anymore, and I do find it in older things. And I think that that kind of vulnerability and that sense of just like, I'm more interested in genuine human expression as opposed to like pushing a narrative or like doing some kind of, like making statements or whatever, that a lot of like art now is like, it's a statement on this, that, the other. And it's like, why don't you just make the art? Not like make it a statement, like make the art and let it express. That's gone. That's very very gone in many ways.
And yet here with what's going on, Marvin set out to make a statement, but I think what sets Marvin apart, I mean, you mentioned real human shit, and not excrement, but you meant figuratively speaking. But I think a really salient point you made about flying high is that it doesn't actually shy away from like, you know what, when I take these drugs, I actually feel good.
Yeah.
I feel really good. I feel like I'm on cloud nine, to quote the Temptations, but I'm so stupid minded. And so he knows, he keeps singing how stupid minded he is. And if you're caught in that cycle, you know what that feels like, you know what that is, and that the particular pain that is. And I think what I'm getting at is two things. One is, and we've talked about this before, but the amount of cynicism, as you mentioned, in our society right now. And I have to point out that Rick Rubin made a great point, and he's said this in multiple podcasts, where part of the difficulty in being an artist, which is a shame when you consider just how conformist and how coddled I think a lot of our cultural institutions are right now. But part of being an artist is that everything hurts. You're a very, very sensitive human being, and and it's no exaggeration. I remember my first year of conservatory, and I got to the point where I would read a headline or something in a New York Times, not just because it was the New York Times, but because it was a disturbing headline. And I would burst into tears, and a teacher told me, they were like, hey, that's part of your gift, but it's a double-edged sword. Part of the craftsmanship and technique and training is learning how to channel all of that rawness, all of that pain, intentionally into the work that you do. And I think what elevates this particular album and the song on that album, and that experience, even though it's highlighting lots of ugly things, is because there's so much intentionality and artistic brilliance at play, not just from Marvin himself, but from all the musicians it's just from the engineers and above. I mean, everything is firing on all cylinders. And it leads me to the second point I was going to make, which is returning to this concept of beauty. And we talk, I think when people mention beauty, there's all this kind of baggage around it, all these connotations of, like I love these accounts on Twitter, and I follow a couple of them, which are great, but it's why don't we make any architecture like this anymore? Why don't we have sculpture like this anymore?
Yeah.
And they're making a great point, but beauty comes in many shapes and forms. And with what's going on, I think part of the reason that the album has such staying power is the sensitivity and the beauty, frankly, with which the album is composed. The strings, the horns, the the choral sections. There's different movements where, I mean, one of my favorite parts of the album, just in terms of construction and composition, is right after "Holy, Holy," which is a song I want to get into later. I think in terms of God and religion and how this all kind of weaves into, and the sacred and how the kind of weaves into my third point I'm going to get to. But right, he has this gorgeous, gorgeous song of "Holy, Holy," and this reverent tribute to God and Jesus, and it's followed right up with the hardest song on the album. This ain't living, and he goes right. And so, I mean, he takes you again. It's the power of intuition, of artistry, but also look, you're crafting this experience for the listener. Of we're going to take you to this really deep and sacred and this sanctuary musically, and then we're going to hit you with taxes. Brother, I can't even pay my taxes. Makes me want to holler and put up both my hands. And so I think the broader point that I'm making is it's the vulnerability married with the sensitivity and ability to, I don't know, wield beauty as a weapon, as it were, which leads to the third point, which is this is why the work is so transcendent. One of the things that it evokes that feeling of awe. It makes us emotional. It makes our hair stand on end when all these things kind of come together. It's not just, oh, it sounds pretty. It's not just, oh, the words rhyme and it's really interesting and it's a great concept. There's a lot of there are a lot of other forces at work when an artist is working at their height. And I think you see it expressed in this album, which kind of brings me, I think, to God Is My Friend and Holy, Holy, because for a popular album, there are some very, very powerful peons. I think that's the word. To God. It's a very, very deeply spiritual album as well. And, I've been wrestling with this question for the past few years of the connection between art and spirituality, art and the sacred, the creatives and harnessing the power of the creator, these kinds of things. And I think it's really interesting that that in this one album, there's all this social strife, and he's singing about struggle with drugs, and then he finds God. He has this sort of moment where he's singing about holy, holy, and the song is really interesting because there's these saxophones, and it's kind of intoxicating, and it's a sensual experience. It's sensual, but it's also reverent at the same time. And to me, that's that duality of Marvin the sex symbol and Marvin the spiritual being, who sort of maybe he's integrating his these parts of himself in this particular song before launching into Makes Me Want to Holler. But I don't know, I said a lot there. I've been talking for a long time, but I'm sure you got lots to respond to.
Oh, I mean, yeah, there is so much maturity to the album. So I do think that there is like this kind of integration that he's like, let me, like, I wanna, and a lot of artists have this moment where it's like, I want to do something more deep. Like, I want to do something that feels connected to the world, that feels like it's somehow helping the world more than just like fun and whatever. And that is very much like the moment where an artist can fall into the trap of like, I'm going to make some political song that's going to tell people what's right. And you can have these kind of like didactic attempts to make something that will impact the world for the better, and it can really fall flat because that's not often what people are looking for in art. They're not looking to be told what the right thing is. It's an experience. They're looking to experience something that is deeper than just like, here's the right idea. And I think that's why this album is able to so successfully go to that kind of place of like commentary and seriousness, while still being very fun to listen to, and just like good musically. Like, if there were no lyrics, it would be phenomenal musically. And so that's a very important thing also. And so you talk about the importance of transcendence and that experience of awe in music. And I think that's actually one of the core ingredients in what makes something a timeless, powerful piece of art, is that it gives you that. And it's not like every piece of art has to do that. Some things are good for just like being lighter or dancier. You know, like there's songs that I enjoy that are pop music and very just kind of like dancey and fun. I love them. They're really fun. I don't have an awe experience, you know, like they don't make my hair stand up on end, but like I have a great time to them. And that's fine. Like that's actually so fun. That's a great thing to do for people also. But then there is this like, if art never did this, it wouldn't be art. And that is to provide these experiences of transcendence where it feels like you're connected to something higher. And that fascinates me because it's one, something that we're very, as humans, evolve to need, and it's two, very connected to like our religious instinct. And I personally enjoy listening to like older weird religious chants sometimes because they're so fascinating in like what they're doing, because they're trying to do the same thing but they're really old. It's just a bunch of guys being like, oh, and I'm you know, it's like not a vibe, you're not partying and whatever, but I listen, I'm like, the unison of the voices and like what it does to create that sense of this, there's something bigger than you. You can let go of your little self for a little bit and kind of merge into this bigger thing. And that's why I said earlier that I think good art takes time, and why I think there's still a need for albums, you know, for albums that you can listen to the whole thing through, because that's how you get really that genuine experience of transcendence through art. And like when we talk about transcendence, it's like, okay, what are we transcending actually? And it's like, it's the things that limit you, that make you smaller, that make it harder for you to see the beauty around you, to connect deeply, to do the things that make you feel connected to something bigger than yourself. So it's self transcendence. And that's what I love about this album, is like it does it for me every time, because so often I am also thinking about all these terrible things in the world. And so often I'm like, does anybody realize what's going on? Like, does anybody actually care? And I know that sounds cliche, but we all think it in our own way, because we think about it in like smaller things, right? Because like I see a lot of the political tribalism in my own peer group, and I still think to myself like, do these people care? Why are they so short-sighted in like they just want to dunk on the other side, and they don't realize that's not actually going to take us to the solution. That's just a vicious cycle forever. Don't you care about actually transcending these problems, about like moving forward? And so like that sense of do other people care is so deeply human. I think it's such a deeply human thing, whether it's like, do they care about me, do they care about the world, do they care about what I'm doing, and all these different things. And so he takes these really human elements and walks you through the album, the process of dealing with them. And you kind of like go along for this ride with him, that it's very cathartic. And that's what I think is just like the pinnacle of art. Like there's things that I love. Like I said, it's not that I'm trying to denigrate art that isn't like always transcendent. Um, and it's not that I'm saying like dance music per se can't be transcendent. There are some electronic tracks that I think are absolutely transcendent. No lyrics, no, just sound. And it's very possible. But I genuinely think that this is one of the most unique high achievements of art, particularly now, when we do not have religious rituals, communal rituals that provide us normally that sense of, I can just get out of my little self. I can stop thinking about myself. I can stop like hyper analyzing all the little things and fixating on like, oh, I got to do this thing tomorrow. Oh my God, I'm late to this thing. Like, have I done enough of this? What if this? What if that? You know, like you can just let go of that and kind of like connect to something bigger and make peace. Because again, it's like, I love that the album is not, it's not a everything is great, we're all gonna, it's all heaven, it's all good, it's all nice. No, it's there. Look at all these problems. I have problems, they have problems, the world has problems, and yet he finds peace through the instances where things are right, through love, through beauty. And that's enough. That's enough to make that peace that allows us to keep going without getting jaded and bitter and resentful and cynical. And then we start to be downward spiraling, because the more cynical and resentful you are, the more you can't see beauty, the more you can't connect deeply, the more you lack that experience of transcendence, the more cynical you get, and then so on and so on.
Well, I think it is interesting that I think it's the song. He's talking about who really cares, singing "Who Really Cares," and I jotted down one of the lyrics from that song, which I thought was really apropos to now. It's who is willing to save a world that is destined to die. And I think it is interesting that he reaches this sort of low point in his cynicism, and then right after that is "Holy Holy" on the
Yeah.
album. And I want to go back to this idea of being the artist, conceiving themselves, or conceiving something, bigger than themselves or beyond themselves. I have a lot of thoughts about that. One, it makes me think about, I had a teacher back in conservatory who coined, I guess we co-coined this phrase called the arrogance of generosity. Whereas an artist, one of the paradoxes, especially of being a performing artist, is you have to be arrogant enough to presume that whatever you have to offer is worth looking at, and worth sharing. But the generosity comes in with you're sharing all of yourself. It's almost a form of self-sacrifice. It has to cost you something, and that's when you can get a song. When you're a drug addict who's depressed, you can do a song like "Flying High," and treat it with such sensitivity because it's personal to you. But I think I've mentioned all of that because, even back when I was in school, there were already complaints among our faculty that they were having a more and more difficult time finding young people who were willing to crack themselves open and really dive into big and uncomfortable emotional experiences. And I think about how I never grew up in an era where all of my childhood mistakes were online for the world to see and preserved forever. We also have a culture, I think, where we're so atomized, and we are married to our machines, and so it allows us to remain apart from each other. There's been so many world events, both foreign and domestically, where we're very cynical about who's in power in our institutions and the people, even our neighbors. And I lost my train of thought. Shoot. There is a oh yeah, there's a guardedness with which we approach a lot of our lives. On top of that, and you alluded to this before, is that now we live in a culture where the artists in particular are very self-censorious, and they're walking on eggshells in order to appease a minority of, let's face it, mentally ill activists, whose main talent is complaining their way into jobs. And I think what this does is that it shrinks the artist by damaging their creative individuality. They have to keep censoring themselves and contracting themselves, contorting themselves in order to fit in and conform.
Yeah.
And what this leads to is a lot of self-commentary, a lot of selfishness. When, as an artist, the greatest artists are those who sacrifice. Whether it's you're a Renaissance sculptor who's spending a decade of his life to make a painting or a sculpture, or you're a Michael Jackson and you're on painkillers because you've wrecked your body through years of dancing and sleepless nights and travel. You have to. People make fun of you because you have to do crazy things with your voice, and and maybe you did get some surgery on your nose, kind of preserve whatever your voice is. But there's something that you've done. There's a piece of yourself you've given up. You have some kind of demons you're struggling with, but you're also someone who is generous enough and courageous enough and open enough and vulnerable enough to share what that is openly. And I think maybe part of it, and why I responded so strongly to a song like "Holy Holy," is that there is, and the album as a whole, and again, it's this romantic ideal, this loving vision of what a world could be. But there's also this sense of, you meeting with and working with your fellow man, and there's this sense of like, I have no idea what's going on, and everything is messed up, but I'll give myself over to God. There's something bigger than myself, and I'll give myself over to that experience. And I think that's one of the reasons that this album in particular has a weight beyond mere mainstream appeal, beyond, oh, it's a pleasant listening experience, beyond, oh, it's Marvin Gaye, he's famous and I like him. There's a different level of openness and expressivity there, which I think is maybe a reflection of the culture of that time, which perhaps does not exist anymore, at least to the extent that it did back then. And I think as a result, we have artists who are smaller in a
Yeah.
sense, in their ability to express themselves, and by extension, their ability to touch, to reach or resonate with people. And I think society, as a result, is worse off for that, when they're not getting that sense of spiritual nourishment or that catharsis that would come from um, artists with the capability and the selflessness to be as generous with their craft as Marvin and his collaborators are on this work.
Yeah, I love that point because it's something that I deal with also as an artist and in my own creative pursuits. That balance between selflessness and self expression. Because in some ways, you're very self absorbed as an artist. It's like, I'm going to tell you all about my thoughts. Hold on, I need a blanket. I'm freezing. Thank you.
You got
Okay. This is
You
so
said
cozy. I'm
that's
so
a
cold.
blanket. You got an animal. That's a whole animal on you. You got a zoo.
Yeah, this is I did not expect this blanket to be this big, but I ain't complaining. Whew, okay, now I'm ready to go. So the thing about that, right? So that balance between selflessness and self-absorption as an artist, because oh my gosh, there's so much art that is like self-obsessed in a way that's not actually selfless, but not actually of the self in a way that is interesting or useful. Because this all art obviously is of the self because you're the self that's creating it. It's something that in some ways is, like you say, the most arrogant thing in the world to be like, you know what I think people want? A whole hours long album about me. I think people want to sit down and listen to my thoughts and my words and my music for hours. In some ways, art is just like the most delusional pursuit. But when you couple it with that selflessness. And I think that's the thing that is confusing to artists. And I see it often with poetry. Poetry is some of the worst in terms of um, full narcissism, self absorption on display, and thinking that that's art, where it's just like, I'm just going to vomit up anything onto this page and it's art because I made it and I called it art. And it's like, no, 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 no. This is a diary. This is a journal or some shit. That's fine, but it's not art if you're not putting in effort. There needs to be standards that you meet to do things, to call it things just like anything else. And the difference between that kind of like really just self-absorbed art and the arrogance of making art but self-expression that serves others, I think, is that sacrifice is often vulnerability, is often your ego, the attachment to who you think you are, and your perception of yourself, like your self-concept. You put that on display. And in a way, it's that's the sacrifice. It's like, I'm gonna let you in. I'm gonna show you the mess. I'm gonna let you pick apart my psychology, no matter how uncomfortable or weird or ugly or genuinely bad. You know, we have music, and this is the problem with people that are like, oh, don't listen to that artist music because then, you know, like he beat his wife. And it's like, that's the whole point of art, is to understand human psychology. I don't listen to people's music or read people's books because I want to approve of them as a person. On the contrary, some of the most interesting art is what has come from people that have like deeply disturbed psychologies or like serious problems, because they've really seen the shit. And so when they put it out for you in a way that's genuinely open, that's useful, because now we can do this. We can talk about the reality of that experience and connect it to our reality and connect it to our full collective reality. And that's what makes art so cathartic and so connecting and so healing, is that it gets you out of like your little bubble and gives you that sense of like, oh, here's this too, like here's this human experience as well, like, and I can relate to that, or I can understand myself better and how I don't relate to it, or things like this, you know. And it's like, but you have to be honest to do that. You cannot make things that are just like fully self-absorbed, or you know, trying to paint some kind of picture. Like when I was embarrassing disclosure, when I was woke, like back in the day when I was one of them, when I went through that phase and I was making art, it was some of the worst art I made, because I was very much concerned with like making art that made me seem like a certain person. My art was a way for me to affirm myself in who I thought I wanted to be. It was like a way for me to kind of like display like, oh look, here's my like Latinx experience or whatever, you know. Like I'd hype up certain things like that. And you can see that now in art all the time. It's like this leading with identity politics, as if like just being a woman somehow makes your art super fucking interesting. And it's like, what about being a woman is the interesting thing? And it's going to be something human. Actually, that's the whole thing. If you start to try to like box it up and be like, this is for this, like I know what this is, da, 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 and it becomes this kind of like weird ego project, it's not as relatable. And so I think that's what really makes the sacrifice in art. And I do agree, like I think that's the problem with this kind of really critical, censorious, puritanical culture that we have now, where everybody's like desperate to tear shit down and tear people down, and leave no space for nuance, no space for complexity. It's like, you're bad, you're good, that's black, that's white. And it's like, that is not a place, that is not a culture that can provide things that are complex enough for us to connect to each other and be real and be honest about what it is to be human. And the sad part is that so often the people that are perpetuating that culture of like hypercriticalness and moral purity tests and all of this, they believe that they're doing something to make the world better, to be progressive and inclusive. And what they actually do is cut us all off from each other and make people more fearful, more self censoring. And when we close off from each other, that's when we misunderstand each other more. And we start to like think like, oh, you know, those people over there, they're bad because they're like this. And it's like, if you spoke to them, you would understand that they're probably going through the same experience you are, but like on a different side of the experience. And actually, that pulls me right back to one of the best songs on this album that says like, talk to me, what's going on, talk to me, don't treat me with brutality, talk to me. And that, I think that's my one of my favorite songs and maybe lines on the album, because it's so simple that it but it's because it's distilled down to this like deeply human solution, which is, let's talk, let's actually talk, let's be open, let's be real. And that's where the solutions are, that's where the actual evolution, actual healing is. And we can't do that if we have a culture that's like more concerned with keeping people in their little tribal lines and instant judgment, as opposed to like really understanding the human experience. And it's actually a very sad and really serious problem we're discussing, and it's come up in the 2 episodes we've done this of only 2 times, which is our culture doesn't seem one that can actually produce art at scale, right? It can't reach enough people. You can find it small, but like now we're having these subcultures and pockets that maybe they are onto something and they are having this good experience, but we're in a country together. Our fates are still very entwined. And so if we can't have as a culture communal experiences that heighten our understanding and empathy and humanness, like make us more human in the good ways where we can like see each other's humanity. If we can't consume at a mass scale that kind of art, then what the fuck? What happens to that? What happens to that tribe that can no longer perform rituals of unification? And that's what I think we're at. That's why I think we keep having these conversations where we come to the same conclusion.
Well, yeah, I mean, you touched on it, but I mean, again, it's the very first song on the album. The album is called "What's Going On," and the phrase, it's both a question of what's going on, but it's also, I mean, again, he says, "Talk to me, so you can see what's going on," and again, it's that element of openness and you mentioned searching for authenticity and true connection, and again, it's that I think part of also what's missing. And I often hate, I shouldn't say hate, but I'm often put off, because it's easy to be the old fuddy-duddy and to be like, well, it used to be this way and now it's not anymore, and so now everything is bad. But I really do think that the openness and the vulnerability is a really big aspect of this. But also, I think a lot of, in many aspects of our culture, we're so jaded and so cynical that we've spoken about this privately, is that there is a dearth of love and a dearth of the romantic. And I think there are people who I think would lean more on the right side of the spectrum, who, I mean, this is why I don't use left and right as much as I do like idealist and realist, in certain contexts. And you need the idealists who will be the artists and the people who will dream of these
Right.
utopias, and you need the realists to say, hey, that all sounds great, buddy, but how are we going to pay for that? I think a healthy society has a great balance between those two forces. And now I think when you begin to talk about, oh, we need more love and we need more openness, I think it's true. The problem, though, is how is that? How are we defining openness and love, and how is it expressed in terms of policy and bureaucracy? You know,
Or
and because we see people who run our cultural institutions now, and they're all about love and kindness, but we know that often there's not a whole lot.
though, like I think that's bullshit. I think they're not actually driven by love and kindness because it's a guys oftentimes, it's like the same thing. Like people are like, oh, I'm so inclusive. Unless you don't agree with everything I say or you use a word that I don't like, then I will literally get you fired from your job and I will make your life ruined. Like, that's inclusive? So what words are we using here? So I often think like you hear this stuff that it is often like kind of the left that takes, like the progressive left that takes this language of like, we're the accepting ones, we're driven by love wins. Shut the fuck up. Like, it's such a lie. I'm so tired of it. Like, these people are the worst. They're often so jaded, they're so snarky, they're so sarcastic. They're the first ones to tell you that if the people aren't within their tribe, they're like throwaway, deplorable Nazis. Like, I genuinely believe, and this is the problem because I understand. I understand that when we hear someone say, like, you know what our society needs, man? We just need more love. That's it. People are like, we already figured out what you mean by that. Like, get out of here. We need boundaries. We need personal responsibility. And I'm like, yeah, we do need all those things. But that's the thing. That's part of love. That's part of actual real love is not this enabling bullshit. It's not saying, I love you, so I'm going to force you to do what I think is good for you against your will. You know, it's not all this weird warped shit that we call love. It's genuine. Like, if you look at the ideal of what is actually to love, what does it mean to actually act from love? The rhetoric you hear from the same politicians that are like, love wins, we're the team of love. Like, you are actively dividing this country. You are constantly demonizing 50% of the population and drumming up fear and hysteria in your own base so that they will get out and vote. Don't question our policies. Don't question why such and such politician just showed up overnight and now you have to accept her. You know, like, no, we're the party of love, whatever. And it's just like, it's so much a facade to act from love, really. And I will be stubborn about this because I don't think we should concede love as a objective concept that exists that we can pursue as a real ideal. I don't think we should concede it just because so many people lie about it and use its name to warp our understandings of it and to get ahead. People lie. And so I think, like, when I listen to this album, to me, the idea of acting from love is very much, this album is an act of love in so many ways. It is so vulnerable. He puts himself out for you to pick apart, like his weaknesses, his fears, like his worries, his cynicism, his love for God, like this very much just like Jesus is gonna save us, like all these different things that are very personal and intimate and vulnerable. And I think that when we do that, like when we are real and we are more focused on genuinely connecting with another person, as opposed to like what we so often do now, which is just like constantly talking past people. And I think that's so much a function of just like our media landscape, where it's so weird. Like, we talk about people so much now and talk to them so much less, I think. Um, so much of the media that we consume, like news, social media, it's about like these people did this thing. And it's so funny because I've even had the experience of seeing people on my side tweet about some influencer doing something, and I'm like, oh shit, I know that person. That's actually a real person, and I know her. She's a great person. And this 2D depiction of her as a screenshot, yeah, it looks terrible, actually. Like, I grant it, I get it. But if you know her as a person, you know that she's complex, and this screenshot just doesn't encompass that complexity. And so that's what I mean about, like, maybe, being driven by love and the importance of connection in what we do, and why good art has that, why good art facilitates that, and why we need that on a mass collective level in our culture as something that's accessible to us. I genuinely believe that these energies, these experiences, these perspectives, however you want to call them, are becoming less accessible to us. Because that's what I mean when I say our culture is cynical. This is the zone we inhabit for the most part. Where, like how like when you're in a funk, you're just kind of like, I'm just in this way all the time. I wake up, I get into this energy, and I stay in this energy. Maybe I have moments that take me out of it, but my baseline is this funk. I think we're there culturally with this kind of like cynicism and doomsday. And my fear is that, so there's a concept called self-fulfilling prophecy for the individual, which is, if you believe you're going to fail at something, you are highly likely to fail because you're envisioning that outcome. You're thinking about, I would fail if I made this move, and da da da. You're practicing in your mind the failure, as opposed to thinking, well, if I succeed, I would make this move, and when I succeed, I would do this next. Okay, you've got the success in your mind. You're thinking through the success. And I think that we're doing that on a collective level where it's basically going to become this self-fulfilling prophecy where we all talk about like our culture is so terrible, everything is declining, it's bad, it's bad. Well, then why would anything change? At what point would one day we just wake up and be like, we fixed it? Yeah, our culture is back and happy. I genuinely think people practice ways of being and ways of seeing. And like we discussed, how this album was emblematic of a kind of like desire for peace and kind of a depth of the music of its time and some of the movements of its time. And how we don't have that. It's not the same now. You have people that like, oh, I want peace, but like, not really. Like, even the left used to want peace and stuff. You know, like that was very much like, oh, we no war and no this and like we want acceptance and whatever. Yeah, of course they were prone to their problems for always, but that rhetoric isn't even used anymore. They're not even kidding themselves. So whether the hippies of the past didn't know because they were naive, it's not even naivety. Like a lot of the people on the left are like genuinely resentful and mean spirited. I know because I was one of them. Like it pulls you in because that's what it offers you. It's like, oh, you're cynical about the world? You're right. And you should be more cynical and you should be mean because of it. Here are the people you can mistreat and blame because of it. It exploits that. And so this is my fear is that we don't have, because this is not a part of our like normal music culture, this kind of like depth and connection and love on the collective level, on this almost societal level, like love for my brother, the other, each other, not just like an individual or whatever. Because that's not in our repertoire. You know, like that's the thing that makes culture and art so important for a society, is like this is your repertoire, this is your history, your backstory, your context, and we don't have the context and the repertoire as much to easily reach in and be like, this is the energy I'm inhabiting, this is the direction my culture is flowing in, these are the level that we're inhabiting as a culture. I think it's not there, and it's I don't know, it scares me.
Well, there's a sense of I think it's interesting. We started out the conversation about, oh, it's the social commentary and beauty, but you sort of walk away from the album in a sense of that, or with a sense that um, it's almost a lesson in how to love. Maybe by today's standards, we don't know as a society how to love anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe this is extended towards our artists. And I mean, but part of the difficulty, part of the problem, and part of what's difficult about that is, again, you take someone like a Marvin or his contemporaries, like I'm thinking of Donny Hathaway specifically. These were deeply, deeply emotional men, deeply sensitive men, but also very troubled. I think people underestimate the um, look, it's why a lot of these people, they get rich and famous. I understood it when my career began to take off, and it was like, I'm still the same person, but now I'm way more exposed. But I have the same problems I did right before, I got this great job. And like I said before, Rick Rubin said, everything hurts, and um, it's very, very difficult and very risky to be in that place where you're open and you're subjecting yourself to all kinds of not just tweets, but just real pain. Um, and again, like I said before, if you have a culture where everyone's hyper self-aware and hyper self-conscious because we can't even tweet, we can't even well, it used to be, now up until a few months ago, we can't even like tweets now or follow certain people because we're going to get persecuted if we do that. I think the last thing that I would say, and we're just over an hour here, so it's a good time to wrap up, is there there's this aspect of of making something personal in acting work. You take a piece of text, you read a script, and all the greatest actors are able to take a piece of text and say, "Oh, I can put myself in this situation as if I were really there," and they can make whatever that situation is personal to them. And I had a wonderful teacher named Zelda Fitzhandler who said that the more personal something becomes, the more universal it is. And it sounds counterintuitive, and I mentioned this before earlier in this conversation, but what that means, and that this is what this album nails, is, you know, we don't know, you don't express your own pain in the same way that Marvin did or does. No one has the same kind of anger. No one has the same kind of sensitivities, the same kinds of depression, the same kinds of problems and stressors, or they don't express them in the same way. But when you have someone like an artist like Marvin Gaye, who is not only a master of their craft, but also courageous enough to be vulnerable and open and to lay themselves bare in a very rich emotional way. Um, that's what resonates with all of us. You don't know what his pain is specifically, but the pain of, the disillusionment with, does anyone care? Who's willing to try? Is this world even worth saving anymore? The pain of seeing, your environment torn to shreds, the pain of war, the pain of wanting desperately to connect with your fellow man, the pain of watching yourself destroy yourself through drugs or whatever compulsion you might have. Because it's so personal to Marvin, it lands more powerfully with all of us. And I think that is one of the reasons, to sum everything up, that the album is both of its time. It has the timeliness, but also it acquires a sense of timelessness. Salome, it has been wonderful speaking to you and your gigantic blanket and hair. I have neither, unfortunately. Although I do think it's funny that you are far more fair-skinned than I, but I am far more lit than you are, so to speak. So let me know in the comments, my friends, how you enjoyed the conversation. We have a wonderful, last week we had a wonderful array. I can't see them now. I'm still learning all this technology. We probably should get a producer soon so we can handle all this stuff, because you guys are leaving such great commentary. But leave some comments. Let us know what you want us to talk about next week. We haven't talked about it ourselves. You're all smart, bright people. And let us know. This is your first time watching. Salome, where can people find you if they choose to do so?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram or on Twitter at Salome Sibonex. And you can also follow my writing on Substack, www.wetheblacksheep.com. I actually just wrote about how I think that short form media and the increasing obsession with politics as drama and politicians as heroes and villains is both emblematic of and a catalyst for our lack of genuine connection to art, like the kind of art that plays out human stories where we can actually look to heroes and villains and have these experiences that are cathartic and transcendent. We're all kind of like becoming a little more lowbrow because we all have a phone in our pockets where we can just scroll and look out for short form media instead of what people used to do, which was like they would go to the theater, they would go to see music shows, and like they would consume longer form media because that's kind of just what you had. And so now we have to be so much more mindful about making time for good art, because if not, you suddenly find yourself with that like creeping cynicism, and you realize like maybe I need to connect to what Marvin Gaye was trying to offer us with this album. Like, remember that love and these big things, like all the ugliness, there can be beauty besides it. And so that is something you can find at my newsletter, wetheblacksheep.com.
All right. Save the babies, as Marvin says. My friends, you can find me at Clifton Duncan on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter/X. I'm so torn about what really to call it, but that's at Clifton A. Duncan. You can find me on Instagram. I think we'll try to do IG lives as well. Maybe next week. We'll see what happens if I can figure out all the tech. You can find me on IG or Instagram, as the old folks say, the boomers say. That's Clifton Duncan Online. I also have a newsletter, which I never update, but I have so many ideas in my head that never come out, called The State of the Arts. And there's the Clifton Duncan podcast as well. I don't know, guys. We Salome and I really enjoy doing this. We wanted to make it a regular thing. We got to make it more official, but it's always a pleasure to connect with you, talk over these things, and I think it's important to keep having these conversations and to get people to stop screaming about politics, even though we touch on it as well, so we can't be hypocrites.
Yeah,
but
totally.
we have to
Balance.
Camille Paglia once stated that that politics, societies come and go. I'm paraphrasing her now, but societies come and go. Politics change, but the art that a society creates is what it leaves behind. And I think there's a huge dearth right now in this particular space. There's not like, there's commentary and art criticism and everything, but in a more heterodox way, in the independent sort of alternative influencer space, there is a huge hunger, I feel, for a break from people, Destiny screaming at everybody, and just we need more people kicking back and enjoying themselves and talking about great art. And I think also the idea of what a classic means is a great thing too. It doesn't just mean Sophocles or Shakespeare or whatever. It's also Vertigo. It's also What's Going On. It's also any number of things. So so we'll keep standing for the classics, and we'll see you all next Tuesday. Salome, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say I love all the comments everybody left. I read through them, and yes, for Poor Boy, if you're still listening, I fucking hate that banana taped to the wall. I know about it. I had my moment of rage. I think that's the best example of art that does absolutely nothing for you. So we could talk about that. We might want to do a takedown art episode where we talk about something terrible. We should also pair it with something that's good for contrast. But yeah, and I just love all the other comments. It really confirms what I have felt, that it's just that there's we need conversations about art too. It's what I wrote in that recent piece. I came to the conclusion that it was like, not only do we need to make sure that we're consuming good art, we also need to talk about it so that we can connect over it. And we can start like reviving a culture that appreciates and enjoys art and like speaks through art. I really think that politics and like news and this kind of formats have started to suck away our attention from art in a way that's really unhealthy for both us individually and us as a culture. And so I'm just very happy with all the comments that people have enjoyed this.
Yeah, especially as Americans too. You're fighting an uphill battle. We're very much, and again, Paglia makes this point. We're very utilitarian and sort of commodified culture. What value does this create? What use does this have? And it's a shame, because America has produced, at least in the 20th century alone, some of the greatest artists the world has ever seen. And so we have a lot to be proud of and a lot to explore. We just in the past 2 weeks, we've already, Hitchcock is British, but y'all get the point that I'm making. We won't keep you all too much longer, but again, let us know in the comments. We want to build more community here, foster more community. We want to keep growing, whatever this thing is. Maybe it's a show, maybe it's not. But all you fine, lovely people, we will see you when we see you. And next week, we'll talk about whatever we want to talk about. Again, leave some comments, share this stream, like it, and help it grow. All right, friends, take care. Bye-bye. And stream isn't ended yet.